opening was just, I'm not a huge Hemingway fan, although I admire what he did for the profession. But he posed this idea of a story being like an iceberg, right? If a writer of prose knows enough about what he is writing and why he may omit things that he knows, and the reader, if the writer is writing truly enough, will have a feeling of those things as strongly as though the writer had stated them. The dignity of movement of an iceberg is due to only 1/8 of it being above water. The writer who omits things because he does not know them only makes hollow places in his writing. So Hemingway had this idea that, and I think it's something that we think about in a lot of different creative work, is that 7/8 of what's important isn't there, right? And for writers, we have this is another way of thinking about it. I don't know how many of you are writers, but we might think about character, setting, dialogue, and action being above the ocean there, and then the 7/8, the emotion, the unspoken conflict, motivation, psychology, relationships, and symbolism being beneath that. To me, that's just a start. That's something to talk about, but it's just the start of what I'm trying to get at here, in sort of, I think, how a lot of people create. So here's the second part. This is I want to discuss, move beyond subtext to talk about the hunt for dark matter, how the hunt for dark matter both drive the work of writers and serve as a way of being for creative people, and just in general. So this is a world map produced in Spain around 1525 or 1526. So just a little over 30 years after Columbus. The cartographer is unknown, of course. What do you notice about this map? Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So we see the outline of the coast. We can see the Americas here in the middle. And it's kind of stunningly accurate for 30 years after Columbus. But rather than include imagined material in unexplored areas, as was customary at that time, the cartographer is content to leave the work blank, inviting future exploration, right? Looking at this map, I'm reminded how writers and other artists can use what they don't know and maybe can't know to their advantage. Okay, here's a photographer's, there's the a close-up of the map. Okay, so I encountered this in, well, I'm going to get back to that in a second. So the photographer and artists, there's a photographer's version of blank space. Does anyone recognize that? It's negative space. It's the Eiffel Tower, right? But, I've sort of found that in my nonfiction writing, I just have to deal with a lot of things I don't know. And for many people, I think that's a problem. Well, how could I write about Sherry when I can't really know her or anyone in this room? I think it's really hard to know another human being. But I think there's a way of writing. This looks a lot like that Eiffel Tower shot. But writing about people in negative space and writing about what you don't know in negative space and thinking about what you don't know in a kind of humble, negative space kind of way. So this, I got this slide out of place, obviously, but this is what happened in my first nonfiction book, The Island of Lost Maps. It was about a guy who went around the country stealing old maps out of libraries. He hit major libraries in this city, well, in Chicago, as well as many other places, and caused a lot of damage. And he wanted nothing to do with me. I wrote a magazine story about him, and then I wrote a book about him. But I ended up describing him kind of in terms of blank space, in terms of negative space. So I'll just read a quick section of that. He was a chameleon. He changed careers and families without looking back. When a daughter from his first marriage asked him for help in buying a car, he refused, saying, "You're a stranger." He could seem to switch age before your eyes, appearing weary one minute and boyish the next. Medium height, medium weight, medium middle age, middle everything. He was a cartographer, he was a cipher, a blank slate. In cartographic terms, terra incognita. His name was Gilbert Bland, and he was the very definition of bland, characterized by moderate, undisturbing or tranquil quality and lacking distinctive character. Because he turned down all my requests to interview him for both the article I wrote for Outside Magazine and later for the book I wrote, I was forced to build my profile the slow, hard way, visiting places he worked and lived, walking through crime scenes, talking to family members, friends, business associates, and victims, methodically piecing together his past through criminal records, court documents, military files, computer databases, and other sources of the public record. The more snooping I did, the more I began to see my quest for information as similar to that of a cartographer. Filling in a life, it turned out, was like filling in a map, and my search for Gilbert Bland soon transformed from an investigation to an adventure. Along the way, I happened upon whoops, am I?
We somehow lost the feed here.
Oh. Is it back?
Not yet.
While you're doing that, I'll finish reading. Along the way, I happened upon a curious subculture made up of map historians, map librarians, map dealers, and map collectors, all gripped by an obsession both surreal and sublime. Like explorers of old, I found myself heading farther and farther into strange waters, never quite sure what I had found or what I was looking for, but endlessly filled with amusement and wonder. Did I click one of those things where I clicked the wrong? There we go. Okay.
Okay,
Thank you. And I'll.
we got to go back to where you were here.
No, we're back to where we are. I can get it from here.
Okay.
Thank you
Okay.
so much.
For goofing it up?
No. Yeah. No. Let's see. No. From beginning. Here we go. Okay. All right. Oh, from beginning. Okay. We'll just go quickly. All right. So I think, that kind of sense of wonder and seeking out things I didn't know about has really driven my work. This is my second book, which was about the first European artist in North America. And again, it was really tough to write about this guy because he lived in the 16th century and there wasn't that much known about him. But I found out a lot about this guy and made some pretty interesting and, in the small world of history, important new discoveries about this guy and about people around him. So this is something I want to talk to my students about always, is I feel like I can teach craft in writing, but I can't teach curiosity. I think probably everyone in this room is brought here by a sense of curiosity. And sometimes I worry that somehow, I'm not a technophobe at all, I'm not a Luddite, but that in our world where information is always present and always just a click away, that we're losing a sense of curiosity. So I'm always encouraging students and fellow and younger writers to just really go into terra incognita and search for the unknown. All right. So this is the third part of my, so I want to just go back to the Edward Hopper painting for a second. What I'm struck by this little section of the painting is it's not only between light and dark, but also between the world in the theater and the world on the screen, right? the painting, in short, is what we might describe as a liminal space, something, a place where in a state of transition characterized by being in between two distinct states, often evoking a sense of ambiguity, unease, or a feeling of being on the threshold of something new. And I wrote about liminal space in my most recent work of nonfiction, The King of Confidence, which is about a con man / prophet from the mid-19th century. But in those days, they had a different name for liminal space. They called it the frontier. And as we quickly learn in this book, liminal space, AKA parts unknown, is where people go to disappear. So here's the first sentence of the first chapter of my book. In August 1843, a man from a small town in western New York vanished into the night. And where he showed up, this guy, was in our area, what was then the West. Do any of you guys know where Burlington, Wisconsin is? It's about 2 hours from here, kind of straight north. And he remade himself. He had been kicked out of New York because he was selling real estate that didn't exist. And he showed up in Wisconsin and transformed himself into a Mormon prophet and potential replacement to the leadership of the Mormon Church. It's a really interesting story, but it's driven by that search for liminal space. Okay, here's my recent collection of short fiction. Also features a lot of liminal spaces, a lot of disappearances. In a story called Beachcombers in Doggerland, for instance, a couple returns to the same beach every year. Their teenage son, the place where their teenage son vanished without a trace while surfing. On these annual pilgrimages, they collect beach trash from the sea, which they hope will give them some clue about his loss. I set the scene on a foggy beach, a place between land and sea, between the earthly and the otherworldly, between present and past, and between life and death. And I'll just read a little chunk of that for you now, too. So this is told by the father of the missing boy, or through the mind of the father of the missing boy. And he's describing his wife wading into the sea and his teenage daughter, the only surviving child, stomping off down the beach. His wife is knee-deep now in the surf, her jeans and cardigan losing their color as she fades into the fog. In this amorphous state, she seems somehow smaller and more fragile. He wants to run to her now, take her by the hand and lead her back to shore. But he's always been afraid of water, a phobia that goes back to swimming lessons at the YMCA on the corner of West Maple and Hudson Street in Kalamazoo, where at age 6, he would wet his swim trunks while waiting in line for the instructor, a huge, gruff man with a hairy back, to throw him into the pool. This terror has only intensified since his son's disappearance, especially today when the water seems to be pressing in on him from the air as well as from the sea. He takes a couple of steps towards his wife, then stops, paralyzed by the sight of the surf licking at the sand. Short of breath, he watches his spouse dissolve into a curtain of vapor that gives him the sensation of teetering over a void, suddenly unable to shake the idea that this woman who works at the circulation desk of the public library and serves as secretary of the local League of Women Voters, this woman who sleeps next to him every night and starts the coffee every morning and drives their child to school, the orthodontist appointments and visits to the therapist, this same woman who was just standing on solid earth is somehow an apparition, present and absent, there and not, just like the melody he now hears emerging from the mist, a wordless tune, beautiful and haunting, which his wife sometimes hums when she's anxious or excited or deep in thought, especially when she assumes he's not listening. I'll get back to that song in a minute, but I want to talk more about liminal space. Okay, here's a Here's another scene set in a liminal world of the sea. Does anyone recognize this? From Jaws, yeah. I went back and sort of watched the first part of this scene from this movie. It really is that dark. And I think Spielberg wanted it to be this place between sea and earth, this place that's not quite one thing or another. Here's this famous scene from Jaws where we get the shark's perspective. And of course, Spielberg used this to create tension and fear, this liminal space. But I think often artists use it for other reasons. So in film, there's this thing called off-screen space. It refers to areas, people, and events outside the visible frame, which are suggested but not shown, creating a sense of mystery and allowing the audience to imagine and engage with the unseen. Does anyone know about, just going back to the Jaws, what don't we ever see here? The shark, right? And famously, that for people who love this film, that's what makes it scarier, right? It's a kind of old horror movie trick, but also filmmakers use it all the time to create like dramatic tension. Here's a shot from does anyone recognize this movie? Days of Heaven from 1978, Terrence Malick's amazing film. It's one of my favorite films, so you're going to have to hear me talk about it a little bit. But this is Brooke Adams, and this is, I'm not even actually sure this movie still is, it might have been actually cut from the movie. I just looked at this sequence recently, and I didn't quite see this exact shot, but it illustrates my point really well. So what's striking to me is that this character is casting her gaze far past the camera, right? She's searching for someone else, someone she cannot find. And I think that use of off-screen space is about like an essential searching that human beings have. Here's another shot from that film. This is the late actor Linda Mons, and this shot is in such a liminal space, right? Between light and dark, between day and night. And again, she's not quite looking at us. She's like dark matter, missing persons define our individual universes, even if we can't see, touch, or know them. For example, I thought I'd read a Stanley Kunitz poem that kind of gets at what I'm saying. My mother never forgave my father for killing himself, especially at such an awkward time and in a public park that spring when I was waiting to be born. She locked his name in her deepest cabinet and would not let him out, though I could hear him thumping. When I came down from the attic with a pastel portrait in my hand of a long-lipped stranger with a brave mustache and deep brown, level eyes, she ripped it into shreds without a single word and slapped me hard. In my 64th year, I can still feel my cheek. I can feel my cheek still burning. This person she never knew, this story she never, or the Stanley Kunitz, or the speaker in that poem anyway, never knew. It's all that kind of off-stage action, and I think the poem just derives a lot of its power from that. Okay. I want to talk now about lost objects, because those are really important to my short story collection. And so we know it's sort of, this is one of the great tropes, storytelling tropes we have. So one example of that would be the Holy Grail, right? This is the thing that everyone sets out in search for. Hitchcock might have called it a MacGuffin in a movie, the thing that everyone on the movie screen wants and needs to have, but and drives the movie, but probably isn't that important. In this case, it is important. But I just think quest narratives drive so much of our literature. Here's another example. This is Moby Dick, and not only does that book is that book about the search for a whale, right, and the search for vengeance. But what I'm struck by is just this Ahab's leg as sort of a lost object too, right? This thing that is there and not there. In film, we often use this. Does anyone recognize this? Citizen Kane, right? So at the beginning of this, now classic movie, the Orson Welles character Kane whispers Rosebud, right? And the movie is a quest to find out what that means, what the dying man's words mean. And we find out that Rosebud refers to a sled, and that the sled is just the symbol to this man of his lost childhood, right? He was taken away from poverty, living with his parents, and given this vast fortune and became, the most powerful man in the world or something. So I just think quest stories are so exciting in this way, to search for something just out of reach. And the stakes can be really low. This is something I always tell my students. There's this essay I love called Pursuing the Great Bad Novelist by a woman named Lara Sewell Matter. And it starts with this line: "On a cold spring day in 2002, I found a damp and crumpled piece of paper on a beach near Reykjavik, Iceland. Unwadding it, I discovered it was a single page from a book." And this book, this woman realizes, is this book from the 19th century. And it's in Icelandic, and she can read enough Icelandic to read this page, and she realizes the book is absolutely terrible, just unbelievably bad. And it sets her on this quest to find out more about the book. And she ends up takes her to the British Library, it takes her all over the place, but it also just takes her inside of her. She discovers that this book was written by this British novelist from the 19th century, a contemporary of Dickens, et cetera, who sold incredibly well and who was really a bad writer. And she has to reckon with her own desire to be a writer through this. And so I think this searching that we do is a really essential thing, at least of my craft. And I just think that objects are full of stories and full of dark matter. And in my collection of short stories, it's what ties them together. So the stories have human beings who come in and out of them. And some of those characters are the same, but the objects are often from other stories. I'm trying to look at how the secret lives of inanimate objects sort of tell us about our deepest emotions, our deepest desires and fears. Okay, so I want to just talk now about vanished worlds. This is, I just want to return to the Hopper painting one last time in this. Believe it or not, art historians have figured out what movie is playing in this Hopper painting. Art historians probably need to get a life, but it is, in fact, Lost Horizons. Which is Frank Capra's film about a group of people who disappear from one world and appear in another. And I just find that so fitting for this painting. I also try to evoke lost worlds. I realize that one of the things I write about is lost worlds. And I want to just read a quick passage from a Toni Morrison novel, Sula, that gets at what I'm saying. It's the opening passage of Sula, the prologue, and if you'll indulge me, it's just a paragraph long. "In that place where they tore the nightshade and blackberry patches from their roots to make room for the Medallion City golf course, there was once a neighborhood. It stood in the hills above the valley town of Medallion and spread all the way to the river. It is called the suburbs now, but when black people lived there, it was called the bottom. One road, shaded by beeches, oaks, maples, and chestnuts, connected it to the valley. The beeches are gone now, and so are the pear trees, where children sat and yelled down through the blossoms to passers-by. Generous funds have been allotted to level the stripped and faded buildings that clutter the road from Medallion to the golf course. They're going to raise the time-and-a-half pool hall, where feet in long tan shoes once pointed down from chair rungs. A steel ball will knock to dust Irene's Palace of Cosmetology, where women used to lean their heads back on silk trays and doze while Irene leathered new Nile into their hair. Men in khaki work clothes will pry loose the slats of Reba's grill, where the owner cooked in her hat because she couldn't remember the ingredients without it. I love that for the way it evokes this world and gets at a kind of change that we're seeing a lot in our world, and I think trying to understand our world right now and our political situation right now, we have to understand the rate of change. But, and I think we all have lost worlds in our lives that we must contend with increasingly as we get older. Okay, I'm going to read one more quick passage from my collection of stories, and it's about a lost world. The story is called, and you'll remember that there was a song, a mysterious song in one of my the other passage I read from this. But this is a story called Song of Remembrance, and this I'm just going to read the first couple of pages. At the University of Berlin in the early 1930s, there was a scholar, now forgotten, who became obsessed with a worm-eaten piece of papyrus. Fragment 30, that was what he and his fellow classicists called the tattered scrap, which had lain buried for more than 1,000 years in an Egyptian rubbish heap dump before being unearthed by British archaeologists in 1895. On it were the last surviving words of an ancient poem previously lost to history. The words of that poem were, "Someone will remember us, I proclaim, in another time." Those lines, the scholar knew, had been attributed to the Greek poetess Sappho, who, in a transitional epoch between oral and written storytelling, sang her compositions in public to the accompaniment of a lyre, the whole performance in an incantatory mix of music and magic, evoking in listeners okay, you saw Sappho in the fragment, what the ancients called thelsis, or enchantment. Being a rational man of science, of course, the scholar put no stock in this primitive belief that a song could cast a spell over someone. Nonetheless, he soon found himself slowly falling under the sway of Fragment 30. Like all his colleagues, he considered Sappho among the most important figures of the classical world. But he knew that although she'd been praised by countless ancient poets, historians, and philosophers, including Plato, who called her the 10th muse, most details of her life, like the missing words of Fragment 30, had vanished. Was she literate? Did she write down the phrase, "Someone will remember us"? Or was it recorded by another scribe, perhaps centuries later? And who, after all, was the us in that line? Did Sappho, as some scholars argued, address her song to a lover, celebrating the timelessness of their shared passion? Was she referring instead, as others suggested, to the musicians and dancers with whom she performed, boasting that their combined genius would survive the ages? Did us refer to all women who loved other women, all inhabitants of her native island of Lesbos in the Aegean Sea, all Greeks? Did Sappho even compose the song, or was it possible, the scholar began to wonder, that it had been on people's tongues long before her birth, long before writing, long before the reach of recorded history, a thing created not in a solitary artist, but by a collective fear of being forgotten, a blind horror that eternity might turn out to be nothing more than a shadow we cast on the wall in front of us to prove our own existence, a mirage that vanishes as the moment we are gone. So I'll stop there. That song does end up, as you can see, playing a role in the stories that follow. Okay, I'm almost done with this part of my talk, but I'll just leave you with a line from Lost Horizon, that movie. It's didn't you ever want to know what's on the other side of the mountain? There are two brothers, and when they're taken from their safe, normal world, one of them is super happy about it and thinks, wow, another world I get to explore. And the other is depressed and angry. So I'll just close this part of my talk, and I want to talk briefly about just shift and talk about something else I'm doing. I want to just return to that map of dark matter from the beginning of our time together. The bright areas on this represent the highest concentrations of dark matter, which is, according to scientists, where galaxies form. And I hope this discussion helps audience members find ways to form their own dark galaxies. So thank you for that. Okay. Now, if you'll indulge me, I want to shift and talk about, let's see. Did we put it? Okay, yeah. Okay. So this, I want to get into a discussion, but just real quickly, I want to talk about Big Shoulders Books. This is just something near and dear to my heart. This is a nonprofit, social justice publishing company I started with some colleagues at DePaul, and in a little over a decade, we have gotten 100,000 books distributed. I'll talk about those in a second. But when I say nonprofit, I mean really nonprofit. Not only does no one make money on this, but we give all our books away for free, and you can order them through our website. It's a weird business model because we never stand out on street corners saying, hey, you want our books? Never. You have to come to us and tell a story. And we create these beautiful books. The first book was a book I edited called How Long Will I Cry? It was an amazing experience. For 2 years, my students and I wandered around the city, not wandered, very intentionally went to areas of the city that are plagued by violence and interviewed people. We interviewed a lot of kids in gangs and kids on the edges of gangs and kids trying to get out of gangs, but we also interviewed a lot of people who'd been lost people to the violence that plagues our city. And we put these together in a stud circle type oral history where people tell their own stories in their own words with our editing, and we collaborated with them on, they had final say in these narratives. And it turned out to be a really powerful thing. We'd done a theater version at Steppenwolf Theater, and it was the first time, as you guys know, Steppenwolf, famous international theater, they'd never toured the city with a play, and they toured with How Long Will I Cry through the library system. And we did the same thing with this book, and it's just been it's still, a lot of people still read this book. It was used in the Cook County Jail for years with youth offenders because they thought it built empathy to read these stories of just how horrifying and traumatic the violence is. And so there are 50,000 copies of that book out there. I'm not going to go through all our books. They're all wonderful. I'll just go through a couple. One other I edited in our latest one. This is called The Garcia Boy. This was such a privilege to edit. When I was in Carbondale, Illinois, talking about How Long Will I Cry one time at a writer's conference, a writer who sadly is now dead handed me a literary magazine and said, with a little Post-it note, and said, you need to read this essay. And I was like, thanks. And he's like, he looked at me in the eye and said, no, you really, really need to read this essay. And it was by this guy, Raphael Torch, amazing essay about the relationship between a school teacher and a brilliant kid who got killed on the southwest side of Chicago. And I was blown away by this essay and started teaching it to my kids. They were blown away by it. So I wanted to learn more about Torch because he lived in the city, and I found out he was dead. He died in his 30s of a rare form of cancer. And I heard he had a memoir that was unpublished, and so I reached out to his wife. I always tease her, we're friends now, that she's who got me on Facebook because I couldn't get through to her any other way, so I joined Facebook and sent her a message, which she ignored, and for 2 years continued to ignore my messages. And then at one point got a hold of me and said, all right, I'm willing to hear you out. What do you got for me? And I said, she ended up giving us this amazing access to everything. He'd written many drafts of this memoir, but he'd also written these brilliant and incredibly moving essays when he was dying of cancer. And my students and I had the opportunity. I just love the collaboration, the real collaboration I have with my students on these books, and we were able to weave it together into a memoir that I think is quite meaningful and good. I'm currently working with students on another oral history. I was just down yesterday on the southeast side of Chicago in the area where our steel mills used to be, and now we left behind a lot of toxic waste, and also some, for those of you who know that area, some very beautiful post-industrial areas where bald eagles are soaring through parks that used to be factories. So that's been really fun. And I'll just tell you about our latest book is a really interesting book that involves objects as well. This is Chicago Mosaic. And I think it's a really timely book. It's immigrants to Chicago telling their stories through objects. So it's called Immigrant Stories of Objects Kept, Lost, or Left Behind. And just these short recollections of what the object meant to them. It's really powerful stuff, and edited by a wonderful colleague of mine, Chris Solis-Green, who's a poet at DePaul. Has a new book out, by the way, if you're into poetry. And his book of poems is from the, it sounds goofy, but it's so beautiful from the points of view of endangered species. Each poem of something endangered. So that's all I got for you. Right now, glad to have a conversation with you. I can talk more about Big Shoulders. I'm glad to talk about my own work. And glad to just talk about anything that's on your mind. Questions? Okay.
All right, thank you so much for that great talk, and I look forward to the Q&A. Before we move on to Q&A, we're going to take a brief musical interlude, and during this time, appeal to your generosity. So we have, I believe, still QR codes and baskets going around. So there, you can either go to our website and click the donate button, or there's a basket coming around. And it is through your generosity that we show how meaningful our Sunday morning programs are to us, and help do things like, keep our lights on and help maintain our beautiful space. So we will return with Q&A in just a few moments.
Thank you. I forgot about that, Sherry.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
Okay. Thank you. So now we will move into our Q&A. If you have a question, please come up to the mic over here and ask it. And if you are watching us on the live stream and you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we will read your questions as well. Thanks.
Hey, thanks.
Hi, how are you? Thanks so much. The general question is, I was thinking about your map, the map you found, which was pleasing you because of its blankness.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a tension between the ability to not know something, you know, once upon a time I heard this as negative capability, like Keats praised Shakespeare for being able to not know things, and then curiosity on the other hand. I wonder if how that tension plays out for you and how you manage it as a writer or a researcher.
Well, I mean, it's a great question. So what I think, first of all, is that a lot of writing is built on not knowing. So Montaigne gives us the word essay in the 16th century. And to essay is to seek, right? It's not about knowing, it's about not knowing. Right? And so essays, I think the best essays, and I'm not talking about a style of writing, I'm talking about how really good essays work. They ask questions, and there are questions central to them. And the cool thing about the form is you don't really have to answer the questions. You just have to explore the questions, explore them deeply. As far as like curiosity, like, I don't know, I talked when I was talking in interviews about this latest collection of fiction, a few people said, well, you know, your book is really research. Like, how much did you know about Sappho before you started writing about Sappho? And I said, I knew almost zero about Sappho before I started writing about Sappho. And there's this thing in writing that writers sometimes say is, you know, yeah, research is important, but don't go down any rabbit holes. And to me, like, rabbit holes are that's where I'm happy. Like, I want to go down the rabbit hole as far as I can, and I want to be, like, so the bad part of that is I've written a bunch of book proposals for books that didn't get published and probably wouldn't get published, and I tend to write long book proposals, so they're like 100 pages. So that's the bad news. The good news is I think when my stuff is working, like, I think there's a sense of wonder in the books, but also just, you know, I love the research. I love the finding. You know, my last book, someone said, oh, do you know there's 60 pages of footnotes or endnotes at the end of your book? And I said, well, if the editor, if Little Brown, the publisher, had not intervened, there would have been 80 or 100. You know, I just, it's not, and I don't, those aren't academic. I mean, I cite sources and whatnot. But mostly what I love about endnotes and footnotes is I get to tell stories that I couldn't tell in the book. I'm a pretty disciplined storyteller, right? And I know how to tell a story, but then there's all these other stories that are interesting. So my life will end, and maybe I won't have written as many books as someone who was more precise and reined in their curiosity more. But I don't know. To me, that's just, it's the whole fun of it. And, you know, I don't know. Does that answer your question at all? I mean, it's just that it is a tough balance, but I definitely err on the side of being an idiot and doing the research. But I also think it gives me an example. I can talk about it from the book about the explorer. I think not knowing is a certain advantage for me as a nonfiction researcher. So I have absolutely no training in history, for instance, but I always get historians to read my books. But so, for instance, on the story about the artist, the first European artist in North America, his name was Jacques Lemoine de Morgue. And at some point, a cartographic historian had made the assumption that he was from this city of Dieppe, this Norman city, which was a map-making hub an artistic hub. And so you just see it written again and again in anything about him, that he was from Dieppe. And I'm like, but his name is de Morgue, Morgues. And so that makes no sense to me, right? You know, it's Miles Harvey of New Zealand, you know? Like, okay. So I started by finding this little hamlet of Morgue that was around at the time. And I ended up in Chartres at an archive finding a guy named Henri Lemoyne, who was either, I think pretty clearly, either his father or uncle. And it just gave me this, because Morgue is right outside Chartres. It really gave me this, and then Henri Lemoyne is interesting in and of himself. He was he was not only an embroiderer for Mary, Queen of Scots, he was what they call a valet de chambre, which means he was in her total inner circle. And he's never been written about before. There are at least 2 books about Mary, Queen of Scots embroidery. And this guy, so suddenly I'm getting emails from France saying, this is so great you discovered this guy, from historians. But I don't think if I was a trained historian, I would have done that. I just think there's partly just not knowing is an advantage. Of course, again, lots of rabbit holes. I could have gone to Chartres and not found anything. So, yeah, thanks.
Well, very good to have you here, Miles. And I'd like to elaborate on how you decide which rabbit hole to go on.
Oh, God.
Is it that you hear or read something and it's like a boom, I gotta go there, or is it something that incubates slowly over time and gets you to commit to writing so many varieties of different books?
Yeah, what a great question. A great question in that I'm challenged by it. I interviewed Studs Terkel a few times in life, and any of you, I don't know if any of you knew Studs when he was alive. He kind of had a patter, like he'd been asked a lot of questions. He was a great listener, but he talked a lot, and he kind of gave you a lot of 1930s, a certain ethos of lefty politics, and a couple of times when I asked Terkel questions, and I'm going to give you the props on this now, Terkel said he would look at me and he'd just stop and he'd think and he'd go, "Oh, that's a good question, kid." And so good question, kid. I think there's some logic to it. Like, for instance, I've always loved maps, and so I think subconsciously I was always looking for an excuse to write about maps, and then I read about this map thief. And I don't know why I love maps. It was very much encouraged in my household. My father was a grade school teacher, and we'd get in a car with a travel trailer behind us and just drive around the country in the summers. And, they would hand us the atlas and say, "Where are we going today?" And I just couldn't believe how much fun that was. "We're going to Keokuk today, and here's how you get there," But otherwise, I don't know. I just guess I think almost anything is fascinating if you really look at it closely. And almost anyone. I was at a party a few years ago with a person who was a not prominent, but a radio host in Chicago. And this person said, some people just aren't interesting. And I didn't say anything because it was at the person's house. But I just sat at the other end of the table thinking, first of all, I don't believe that. And if it comes off that way, I feel like it's my fault. Like, I feel like I haven't been curious enough. When I talk to my kids, some of my kids are in their 60s. The grad students and undergraduates I work with, when a lot of them aren't really, because they're creative writing people, and they're not really used to doing interviews. And I just say, they're also from they kind of get this idea that they're somehow stealing something or appropriating something if I ask you about your life. And I said, people will tell you if you're stealing or appropriating. But I just said, here's the thing, you have to be really curious. And if you're really curious about another human being and you look them in the eyes, and I've interviewed, I don't know, many hundreds, maybe thousands of people in my life. I just think people, if you, Like, I think we're in a world where everyone talks and no one listens, right? We all broadcast, we all brand ourselves on social media. I do it too. We're all yapping all the time out at some vague world, and I think people don't feel listened to. And so I think if you're curious, it gets you a lot of places. Yeah, thanks. There's a non-answer to a very good question.
Hi. Thanks. I enjoy a good rabbit hole too, so you've given me quite a few today.
Yeah.
Can you talk about liminal spaces? I think I got an answer from you later. I thought about the question earlier in your conversation, but it's everywhere now.
Yeah.
I see it in all sorts of popular media, on YouTube, all over. Like, why?
The why of liminal spaces? Yeah, I mean, I think that is, as you point out, a popular term and slightly academic term. And although I'm an academic, I'm suspicious of those. I mean, I just think it's a place where there's not certainty and there is potential. I mean, one thing we didn't talk about is just this massive, in this painting, this massive liminal space between two worlds, right? If I were teaching a painting class, I don't think I'd say, hey, draw this big brown blob, you know, this big brown division here between this and this, right? But I think that, like, this painting is, as I said, full of liminal spaces, right? Between, like, literally between this lived world or seemingly lived world and the movie, right? And so, yeah, I mean, words get popular, but I think the idea. So as I pointed out in my talk, you know, when I wrote about the con man in King of Confidence, liminal space, you know, in the 1840s was called the frontier, right? This place where you could transform yourself into something else, where the old rules don't apply, where there's both possibility and mystery. Yeah, so does that help?
Yeah, you mentioned it politically too. Like, it seems that part of it might be you were in a period of transition.
Yeah.
And I was like, is it something grander? Is it actually, or is it just like some zeitgeist that creative?
I mean, that's a great question. And in terms of politics, I mean, it's interesting because the guy I wrote about, James J. Strang, was this was a kind of a massive period of transition in American history, right? This is right before the Civil War, and it's when all these new technologies are coming in, the telegraph, railroads, and this guy was brilliant at manipulating this new technology. So there was a lot. He was a former newspaperman and a former postmaster general, two really important things in the communication system in the 19th century. And so when the telegraph came in, there was a lot written about, oh, you know, this is going to transform America. Now people in, you know, the hinterlands can be in touch with New York and Washington really quickly. Well, this guy Strang understood that the reverse was also true. So he's up on this island. He wound up on Beaver Island, which is, do any of you know that? Yeah. So it's this amazing, but it's the biggest island in Lake Michigan, but it is in the middle of nowhere. And where he set up a quasi-independent state and a pirate colony. But he was a very good writer of a certain kind. And he understood that he could write about his world because of this kind of early version of the internet newspapers used. And he could get his own kind of propaganda and lies and his version out. And so he became this national celebrity, basically by writing his own stuff, right? And so I do think we're going through another liminal period in communications. And I just think there's times when the truth is a little porous and that there are people who know how to take advantage of that. I mean, I think we see that today, right? Where we're in a huge technological shift. I mean, it's amazing how much the media has changed since I went to journalism school in the 1980s. And there are people who can take advantage of it. There's a guy named Brock Pope wrote this book called, I can't remember what it's called, But it's about another liminal period. It's about this guy who, I'm not making this up, this famous American fraudster who was a doctor who, his whole thing was, it was like the early version in the 1920s and 30s of the little blue pill. He would sew goat gonads into men's testicles to make them more whatever. And it sounds absurd, but tens of thousands of American men went for this. And he was also one of the early founders of country radio, because he was in Kansas. He had this huge radio station in Kansas. Then he got kicked out of the country and put this pirate radio station in Mexico to sell this completely fraudulent product. But in the meantime, he's out in Kansas, said, you know, I can't talk about goat gonads all day. Why don't I get the Carter family in here to sing live, right? So, you know, I mean, and again, I don't think this guy was like a media expert, nor do I think President Trump is a media expert. I think they understood, well, you know, right now is a time when, because of these changing technologies, there's this real porous version of truth. That's liminal spaces in history. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming in for a really enjoyable talk.
I think I'm honored to be here, so thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, and I think my question really relates to that, and I was interested in your allusion to the politics driving this super rapid pace of change and glut of information, and I wonder, just as a writer, how you think about how we can use our curiosity or other tools to filter it in a way that we can kind of have that stream of information be productive and help us grow versus just become overwhelmed.
Yeah, I think it's the essential question of our time, isn't it, in a lot of ways. So I have a lot of feelings about this. I say to my students, my ideal book would be to have MAGA people interview lefties, and lefties interview MAGA people, not because I'm definitely on the left-hand side of that equation by far, but I just think, for instance, I think a lot of people in rural areas have a really legitimate grievance, not necessarily with where their grievance is placed, but there's been massive depopulation. This has been going on since World War II, and like of my friends from rural Illinois that I graduated from U of I, but I also went a year to Southern Illinois University. I had a lot of friends from rural Illinois. Not one of them moved back to their hometown, and these were like daughters and sons of bankers, of, you know, the mayor of the, so there was this massive brain drain, the death of the family farm. I think a lot of people, the area I'm writing about now, where the steel mills closed, it's shocking, right? So in one generation, you go from these people who are impoverished. There's a great movie called, and it's a book too, called Exit Zero. And you go from these people who are impoverished, and then the unions come in and they attain middle class life, and then in the 80s, the steel mills just start closing, and this neighborhood goes instantly back to poverty, right? So I think what demagogues can do is take advantage of those grievances, but I just think like listening is a big thing. You know, I'm a big, I would say like a practical thing, I'm a big go up to Wisconsin and knock on doors. I went up 11 times for Harris, and I just went up 2 times for the Supreme Court judge. And I'm not saying everyone should do that, but I think it's absolutely, I gotta say, it's absolutely fascinating, even when you're talking with people you don't agree with at all. I had some really interesting conversations with Trump voters. I also had conversations with people who couldn't bring themselves to vote for Trump but weren't happy with my party. It's really fascinating to just talk, and even the people who were from my party, and they were really different than me, and they had different ideas about things. And so I just think talking to our fellow Americans, that doesn't mean you don't, I was up there advocating. It's not like I was hiding my opinion. But I do think sometimes we live in a really polarized time. You know, I have kids in their 20s, and they grew up in this world where if someone doesn't agree with everything you say, they're your enemy. They're disrespecting you, and they're marginalizing you, And I'm like, well, no, there's just, I grew up in a very liberal family in Downers Grove, Illinois, which was then the second most conservative county in the country. And my parents, just taught me to, state your opinions, but also be respectful of other people. I don't know. I don't know where that gets us. I do think we could do more listening in general. And I think that's true on both sides. I just do think, right, like we live in this polarized world where we're just like, that's not saying I don't strongly believe in one side over the other, but it's, I feel like, since we're going there, I feel partly that Trump's success is the failure of my party to really listen to people. And thanks.
So
Yep.
Hi, Miles. Thanks for coming. You spoke of Hopper and a couple other artists as interested in the notion of the presence of absence. I'm wondering, have you thought about or explored this phenomenon with musicians? Are there musical artists who you see as worth thinking about in this?
Jeff, it's a great question, and I'm not an expert on music, but I think absolutely, I know absolutely that negative space is a big thing in music. In fact, one of my closest friends is a jazz musician. He's a pianist, and last time I saw him play, I said, you seem to be playing even less notes than usual. And he said, I'm trying. What he's saying is he's trying to use negative space. I think he might even use that term. So I'm probably not the person who should be talking about music. I love music, but I'm not a musician. But I think that's obviously a thing in music, from classical music to the Pixies. I think there's a lot of negative space there too, and I think, as with all negative space, it opens up possibilities, imaginative possibilities. I didn't talk about it here, but one of the writers I really love is this guy W.G. Sebald, this German writer who lived in England, who's sort of revolutionized. People either love him or hate him, and if you hate him, I don't blame you. I love him, but he kind of revolutionized the idea of the novel in a certain way. His novels are full of pictures, often pictures that he found at garage sales, or he's got these purposely blurred Xeroxes. And I think what he's trying to say is that words can't accomplish everything, and he's trying to come up with a new kind of semiotics, a new kind of symbolism, where words work with pictures, and the pictures don't usually illustrate exactly what he's saying, but there's this kind of space in between. And when we first started reading, my friends and I were like, why do we love this guy so much? There's no character, no plot, why is it that we're so compelled? And I think it's because he just opens a bigger space for the reader to take part in the narrative. Yeah.
I'll briefly mention the pianist and composer Satie, who leaves a lot to the imagination and doesn't always resolve a melody.
Yeah.
And I find him worth thinking about in these terms.
Yeah, yeah. And I love, Brian Eno's, music for films, etc. But that does the same thing. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Another question about liminal spaces.
Yeah.
The Atlantic had an article, I think it came out this week, about how these researchers at the University of Zurich had inserted a chatbot, not a chatbot, had inserted an AI character into a Reddit. It was a Reddit community where the whole point was try to convince me to change my opinion on something. And the researchers found that the AI was getting as many likes as some of the more popular people in this Reddit chat.
By just saying, I'm open.
The AI, the argument, the researchers would, ask the AI to come up with a response. And the people in the Reddit community did not know it was an AI. So it's become an ethical dilemma. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how AI could impact your craft in the future and how far away we are from the possibility of AI writing novels and stories and
So there's a story in the collection called The Master of Patina, which is about, someone who interviewed me for the book said, this is a great sort of metaphor for AI. It's not about AI, it asks the question of if it's about a forger, essentially, who makes ancient works of art that are in every way ancient, including through scientific testing, ancient. And beautiful. And the story does ask the question, if something is absolutely beautiful and pleasing and moving, does it make any difference that it's not authentic? And I hadn't thought about it with AI, and he said, this really got me thinking about AI. So I said, yeah, it does answer that. It does ask that question, and I told him I don't really have an answer to that question or yours. I think there are real risks to all professions. For writers, I totally understand why the Hollywood film writers, apparently they didn't get enough of a guarantee in their last negotiations held out on AI stuff. A lot of people are like, what do they have to worry about? It's always been my contention that AI can probably do, for instance, superhero movies, right, which are based on formula. And so and if anyone loves superhero movies, I'm not insulting them. I'm just saying, what people like about them. In this version, Batman is, X. I don't know. Batman is whatever, or Robin is this. That, right? Like we kind of go through this thing where, this is the, the Dark Knight, right? This is the dark Batman, right? But otherwise, they sort of work on formula, like a lot of Hollywood films. And it occurs to me you could punch in, even now, AI and probably write a pretty good superhero movie. There's another story in my collection called The Man Who Slept with Eudora Welty, which it's about a narrator who's his life is very much like mine, although including his graduate school and best friends in graduate school, but who meets a man on a train who claims to have been Eudora Welty's lover and sort of starts telling him pornographic tales about Eudora Welty. And through this character, who may or may not have been a slightly ignorant grad student, starts reading Eudora Welty. And in this story, the man who slept with Eudora Welty is the narrator who doesn't just... the story, I think, is about the incredible intimacy that writers and readers have, which I think is comparable and sometimes to sex and sometimes more intimate, better than sex. I just think it's so I'm not sure AI can do that, but maybe it can. I mean, I don't know. I don't really know about AI. I do think, because I've written about history a little bit, I do think we're always thinking the world is going to end. And that's kind of a trope. And people in this room would be more suspicious of that trope than in other religious gatherings around. But it just is. So I'm not sure that AI is going to make us all these submissive. There's potential for it. I have my daughter has type 1 diabetes and has had it since she's 4. She's doing fine, and there's incredible technologies now. But how cool if we could come up with a cure for that and for many other illnesses. I'm not like a techno optimist at all, but I'm also I worry about this. Everything's bad. On the other hand, The Guardian published a short story that I thought was pretty good that was written by AI, which made me nervous. Yeah.
This will be our last question.
Okay.
I read 2 of your books, the one about Bland and Canned Confidence.
Oh, thanks.
I know Bland didn't talk to you, but do you think it's the obsession was finding the maps, or just the obsession of stealing from the libraries and all the other sources?
Yeah. Yeah. So this guy Gilbert Bland, I think it's a great question. He is known to have stolen maps from 19 libraries. and what he would do is he was very smart in that he would, in the antiquities business, there's what's called a need not to know. And it happens not only at local map dealerships, but at auction houses, right? So while I was writing this book, there was this very rare Ortelius atlas that showed up at Christie's in London. There are 8 copies of this atlas in the world. And just before the auction, the National Library of France called Christie's and said, we're missing our copy. And Christie's was like, oh, really? Because we got this from the most reliable of sources. And so Bland did the other thing. He sold low, or he stole maps worth, $1,000, $5,000, $500, and then he would sell them to local map dealerships. And one way I think he was a scam artist. Yeah, probably still is. He's out of jail now. And in some ways I think it was just a scam, but your question's really good because there was this thing. He had a history of adopting other identities. And so, I don't quite know. I think he had an interest in, kind of becoming someone else, and maps get you there. But I also think he must have had some kind of interest in maps, because I got to say, like, stealing maps is not the easiest way to make a lot of money. And he got caught, and he blackmailed the FBI, said, if you ever want to see the other maps that are missing, you better give me a life sentence. And he did get a life sentence. He only spent 1.5 years in jail. So I don't know. That goes down as a mystery. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. If anyone wants to buy books, I can.
All right, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Now I'm looking, I know that we had somebody from our kitchen committee who wanted to make an appeal, and I think she probably had to run back to the kitchen, so we'll hold space for that if she comes back. All right, so we have a few announcements. All right, so today after our program, there will be a newcomers chat in the upstairs boardroom. So if you are new to our society and you'd like to learn more, please consider joining the newcomers chat, which you can reach via the stairs right here, or the elevator outside the doors to head up. You can come on up and sure.
Hi. Hello, can you hear me? I guess I can't.
Yep.
Because I'm speaking to the audience. And this is the sign-up board for kitchen duty. And today I was on the kitchen duty. The regular person is not here. And several things are needed. First, provisions. We're very low. We're very low on provisions. So I hope you enjoy what we have today. And maybe remember to bring things next time you come. Second, I appreciate all the people that have signed up, and I appreciate the people who haven't signed up and volunteer when it's needed to work in the kitchen, clean up or get things settled, because sometimes people sign up and they don't show up. So sometimes we need that. And so I suggest, please go to the kitchen, sign up. We need some sign-ups, and also put it on your calendar, on your wall, so that you remember to show up and come. Thank you.
All right.
Again, all those that have helped, thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay. There will be no regular Sunday program next Sunday, May 11th. However, member Charlie Sachs will lead an informal coffee chat to reflect on our humanist experiences and perspectives while we enjoy light snacks. We'll gather in our reception hall to share our stories and hear from one another. Consider bringing a snack to share and stay to help with cleanup. Also next Sunday, our Creative Writers Group will meet in the upstairs conference room at 12:15, led by Charlie Sachs. We encourage and support aspiring or experienced writers in the community and cultivate our written expressions of the human experience. Newcomers are welcome. Oops, sorry. Our film discussion group meets virtually on Monday, May 12th at 7:15 p.m. We'll discuss I'm Still Here and Anora, both available on Amazon Prime Video and other streaming services. For more information or to join the discussion, see John Ungashik or contact our office for the Zoom link. Our next community service outing will be on Wednesday, May 28th from 4:15 to 7 p.m. We'll be cooking and serving dinner at the Beth Emmett Soup Kitchen in Evanston. This is a family-friendly community service opportunity. Adults and children over 6 may volunteer. We're responsible for purchasing the groceries for the meal, which will cost around $500. So whether or not you can volunteer that day, please consider making a financial contribution towards feeding those in need. To contribute, make a donation to the Ethical Humanist Society and mention in the comments that it's for community service activities. See Carrie Ost for more information or to volunteer. And on Sunday, May 18th, we'll have Community Day. A community day focusing on living our values. As humanists, we value showing respect and care to others, but it seems that offensive or disparaging language and other examples of social toxicity have been elevated to normal. In this discussion, we'll share situations where we've experienced or witnessed this new reality and explore strategies to address these challenges and live our values. We'll also share our experiences, successes, and shortcomings and discuss how we can respond ethically to future situations by drawing on our values and principles while accounting for our vulnerabilities. Through this conversation, we hope to begin a dialogue that helps us strengthen our ethical resolve through our shared vision and mutual support. For more details on upcoming Sunday morning programs and other activities, see our website at ethicalhumanistsociety.org. Connect with us on Facebook and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for videos of past speakers and future streaming programs. And so now I would like to invite you to join us out in the reception area for coffee hour. And Miles has books for purchase and will sign, right? If anybody wants to get a book signed, you can do that and continue the conversation. Thanks for coming.